Evelyn Carter was 32 years old, the woman her family had once been ashamed to mention by name. 6 years earlier, on the coldest Christmas Eve Seattle had seen, she had been locked outside on a balcony with a box of cold leftovers. 6 years later, her phone would not stop vibrating with 112 missed calls from the very people who had pushed her out of that house. That night, Evelyn had just finished a shift of nearly 14 hours at a machine shop by the harbor. Machine oil still clung to her hair. Her scratched hands had been scrubbed several times, but black grease remained buried deep in the lines of her palms. She changed into her cleanest coat, held the handmade gift she had prepared for her late father, and ran through the freezing rain to make it to dinner on time. Inside the seaside house, warm yellow light spilled through the windows. Laughter echoed from within. The dining table had been set with 6 sets of silverware, and crystal glasses reflected the glow of the fire. The person who opened the door was Marissa, her stepmother. Her eyes stopped on Evelyn's mud-stained shoes, then slowly moved upward to the streak of oil on her collar. Her smile disappeared before Evelyn could even say Merry Christmas. Harper appeared behind her in a dark red velvet dress. She held a glass of wine, and a new watch glittered on her wrist. Harper looked at her younger sister as though she were a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. "You actually came," she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Evelyn held the wooden box against her chest. Inside was her father's mechanical watch. She had spent 3 months restoring every gear, just so she could place it on his memorial altar on Christmas Eve. But Marissa did not allow her to step inside. She pulled Evelyn toward the side entrance and opened the door leading to the balcony. The cold wind struck Evelyn's face. Snow covered the railing. On an iron chair sat a foam container holding several slices of cold chicken, hardened potatoes, and a half-eaten piece of cake. A note had been placed on top. "The smell of grease on you is ruining the family dinner. Eat out here or leave." Evelyn read every line, slowly. No one came outside. Through the glass, she saw Harper say something to a relative, and the entire table burst into laughter. Marissa closed the curtains, as though hiding the balcony would make Evelyn disappear as well. In that moment, she no longer felt cold. She simply saw everything clearly. For years, Evelyn had believed that if she worked harder and became more successful, she would finally be acknowledged. She thought that one day they would understand that the machines she built were not low-class work, and that her oil-stained hands were still capable of creating something valuable. But that Christmas Eve gave her the answer. Evelyn picked up the food container, walked down the stairs, and threw it into the trash. Then she returned to the small attic room where all of her belongings had been shoved into 3 cardboard boxes. She did not cry. She did not pound on the door. She did not beg. She simply packed everything that still belonged to her, placed the watch inside her suitcase, and left the house before midnight. As the bus carried her across the snow-covered bridge, Evelyn watched the city slowly recede behind her. She had only a few $100s in her pocket, no stable job, nowhere to go. But for the first time in her life, she no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. That night, Evelyn deleted every family member's phone number. None of them knew that 6 years later, the woman they had forced out into the snow would become the only person with the power to decide whether that house still belonged to them. The final bus brought Evelyn to the industrial district north of Seattle just before dawn. The sleet had turned into cold rain, blowing sideways across rows of dark warehouses and smokestacks covered in mist. She stepped off the bus with an old suitcase, $380 in her bank account, and her father's mechanical watch wrapped securely between 2 layers of clothing. No one was waiting for her at the stop. No one called to ask where she was. Evelyn rented a small room above a tire repair shop where the window would not close properly and the heating system only worked on the days the landlord remembered to pay the electricity bill. At night, passing trucks shook the thin walls. During the day, the smell of burned rubber and machine oil seeped into every curtain. On her first morning there, she applied for a job at a metalworking shop nearly 3 miles away. The foreman studied her engineering resume, then looked at her narrow shoulders beneath the old coat. He told her the work there was not meant for women who preferred sitting behind drafting tables. Evelyn did not argue. She simply pointed to a lathe that was making an unusual vibration and said the spindle bearing would fail before the end of the afternoon shift. 3 hours later, the machine stopped completely. Evelyn was hired that same day. There were no miracles during the first few months. She worked 16 hours a day, beginning with cleaning metal shavings, replacing belts, and repairing equipment no one else wanted to touch. The heat from the metal hardening furnace burned her wrists. Once, a piece of steel tore through her glove and left a long scar across her right palm. She kept going. At night, Evelyn studied automated control programming on an old computer she had bought from a pawn shop. She took apart broken motors, collected discarded sensors, and assembled small prototypes on the floor of her room. Some nights, she fell asleep at the table with her cheek resting against blueprints still stained with oil. Other people saw an exhausted female mechanic. Evelyn saw a system that had not yet been completed. The turning point came when a packaging line at the Harper shut down. The operating company was losing tens of thousands of dollars every hour, and the manufacturer's technical team could not arrive for 3 days. Evelyn asked for permission to inspect it. The manager laughed because he thought she was far too confident. 4 hours later, the production line was running again. She did not merely fix the malfunction. She rewrote the coordination system, increasing operating speed by nearly 1/3 and cutting the number of machine jams in half. News spread quickly among the workshops around the harbor. Evelyn began taking small contracts on weekends. She rented an abandoned warehouse, bought 2 used robotic arms, and restored them herself. On a steel sign outside the entrance, she engraved the name Aegis Dynamics. Aegis meant shield. No one knew what she was trying to protect. 3 years after leaving home, Evelyn received an envelope from the lawyer who had once worked for her father. Inside were copies of the mortgage records for the seaside house and his old manufacturing workshop. Marissa had used both properties as collateral for investments Harper had recommended. Those investments were collapsing. Harper had poured money into technology projects inflated by false reports and promises of growth that had no basis in reality. When the market turned, the family company began losing contracts. Cash flow slowly dried up. The bank transferred the loans to a distressed debt fund. Evelyn sat alone in her office, staring at Marissa's signature on the documents. She could have allowed them to lose everything. Part of her wanted to. But that house did not belong only to Marissa and Harper. The pencil marks showing Evelyn's height since she was 6 years old were still on the western wall. Her father's workbench was still inside the old workshop, along with his hand-drawn designs and the wooden cabinet he had built himself. She could not allow his legacy to fall into the hands of a stranger looking to profit from it. So Evelyn acted in silence. Through a subsidiary, Aegis Dynamics purchased the entire debt portfolio secured by the house and the old workshop. The transaction records remained confidential. Evelyn's name did not appear on any of the letters sent to the family. Marissa believed they had simply been assigned a new creditor. Harper believed she still had time to turn everything around. Neither of them knew that the person holding the legal keys to all of their property was the same girl they had once forced to eat outside on the balcony. By the 6th year, Aegis Dynamics owned 3 manufacturing facilities, employed hundreds of engineers, and held some of the largest automation contracts in the Pacific Northwest. Evelyn no longer lived in a room with a leaking roof. But she still kept the old suitcase in the corner of her office. It reminded her that her empire had not begun with money. It had begun on a bitterly cold night, when her entire family closed the door in her face and unknowingly taught her how to build a different door for herself. 6 years after that Christmas Eve, Harper walked into the headquarters of Aegis Dynamics wearing expensive high heels, carrying a thick folder, and believing that the moment she appeared, every door would open for her. She had no idea that the person she was about to beg for help was the younger sister her family had once pushed out into the snow. The family company had been running out of cash for 3 months. 2 major partners had terminated their contracts at the same time. The bank had refused to extend the loan. The projects Harper had once insisted would generate several times their original investment were now nothing more than reports filled with red numbers and mounting losses. Marissa had begun selling jewelry to pay the employees. The relatives who had once praised Harper as the pride of the family were now calling constantly to ask when they would get their investment money back. But Harper still refused to admit that she had failed. She said the market had overreacted. She said all they needed was one more short-term injection of capital and everything would return to normal. Most importantly, she believed the mysterious chairwoman of Aegis Dynamics would never reject a profitable restructuring opportunity. For weeks, Harper sent letters, made phone calls, and used every financial connection she had to arrange a meeting. Eventually, she received an appointment. When she arrived, Harper did not find the cold glass tower she had imagined. Instead, she stood before a massive mechanical complex where robotic arms transported components between automated production lines. The sound of metal striking metal echoed at a steady rhythm. Data screens glowed along the walkways. In the middle of the machine inspection area, a woman was bent beneath a control panel. She wore gray protective clothing, her hair was tied back neatly, and machine oil stained her wrist. Harper saw only the worn gloves and the scar running across the woman's palm. She did not recognize Evelyn immediately. When the woman stood up, Harper froze for a second, but her surprise quickly turned into contempt. "You work here?" Harper asked, her eyes sweeping over the oil-stained clothes. "I thought after all these years, you would have done something better with your life." Evelyn looked at her sister. There was no anger, no surprise. She simply wiped her hands calmly with a clean cloth. Harper checked her watch and said she had an appointment with the chairwoman of Aegis Dynamics. She demanded that Evelyn summon whoever was in charge immediately because the situation was extremely urgent and she did not have time to speak with a repair worker. Several engineers standing nearby remained silent. They knew exactly who Harper was speaking to. Evelyn removed her gloves, placed them on the table, and told Harper to follow her. They walked through the production lines, entered a private elevator, and went up to the highest floor. The farther they went, the more irritated Harper became. She repeatedly asked why no assistant had come to greet her and why the meeting was being handled so unprofessionally. Evelyn did not answer. The elevator doors opened into a spacious office overlooking the entire Seattle harbor. On the wall behind the desk was the Aegis Dynamics emblem, cast in steel. Beside it were patents, engineering awards, and photographs of major contract signings with large corporations. Evelyn walked toward the chair in the center of the room. Then she sat down. Harper stood completely still. The smile vanished from her face. Evelyn opened a prepared folder and pushed it across the desk. The first page was the Certificate of Incorporation for Aegis Dynamics. The next page listed the shareholders. Evelyn's name appeared as the founder, chairwoman of the board, and controlling shareholder. Harper flipped rapidly through the pages, her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. But that was not the worst part. The second folder contained the entire debt portfolio of the family company, the mortgage on the seaside house, and the controlling rights to their late father's manufacturing workshop. Evelyn was the sole creditor. Harper looked up. Her face had gone completely pale. She asked when it had happened. She asked how. She asked why no one had told her. Evelyn simply replied that Harper had never cared who stood behind Aegis Dynamics. She only cared whether that person could save her. Harper immediately pulled out her phone, took a photograph of Evelyn sitting behind the chairwoman's desk, and sent it to the family group chat. In less than a minute, Evelyn's phone began to vibrate. Marissa called. Then came calls from the aunts, the uncles, and the cousins who had once ignored her. 10 calls, 30 calls, 70 calls. By the end of the afternoon, the screen showed 112 missed calls. The messages poured in with the same tone. They said they missed her. They said the family had always loved her. They invited her home for the year-end celebration as though 6 years of silence had never happened. Evelyn watched the screen light up again and again, then turned the phone face down. Across the desk, Harper finally understood the truth. The woman she had just called a repair worker did not merely own the company, they were begging for help. She also held the power to decide what the entire family would be allowed to keep after everything collapsed. The 113th call came while Harper was still sitting motionless across the desk. Marissa's name appeared on the screen. Evelyn watched it vibrate 3 times before turning on the speaker. Her stepmother's voice came through too quickly and far too sweetly, completely different from the cold voice Evelyn had heard on Christmas Eve 6 years earlier. Marissa said she had missed Evelyn every day. She said the family only wanted her to come home. She described what had happened years ago as an unfortunate misunderstanding, an impulsive decision made during a stressful moment. Harper lowered her head. She knew that was not the truth. No one had lost control that night. The box of leftovers had been prepared in advance. The note had been written beforehand. The balcony door had been locked from the inside. It had not been a mistake. It had been deliberate humiliation. Evelyn did not interrupt. She allowed Marissa to finish her awkwardly arranged apologies, then calmly asked whether she still remembered what had been written on the note that night. The other end of the line went silent. Evelyn repeated every word. "The smell of grease on you is ruining the family dinner. Eat out here or leave." The air in the office turned rigid. Marissa began to cry. She said she was getting old. She said Harper was under enormous pressure. She said the company did not belong only to them, but also supported dozens of innocent employees. Finally, she begged Evelyn to inject capital into the business and extend every outstanding debt. Evelyn looked through the glass. Below, the robotic arms continued moving with perfect precision according to their programmed rhythm. 6 years earlier, she had dreamed of being accepted by her family. Now, a single signature from her would be enough to save all of them. But she no longer needed their approval. Evelyn said Aegis Dynamics would not invest another dollar in the family company. Marissa cried even harder. Harper immediately raised her head and accused Evelyn of seeking revenge and deliberately forcing the entire family into the street. For the first time, Evelyn's voice turned completely cold. She said they were the ones who had used her father's house as collateral for reckless investments. Harper was the one who had signed misleading reports. Marissa was the one who had hidden the risks until there was no way back. Evelyn had not pushed them to the edge. She was simply the person standing there when they walked to it themselves. After a long silence, Evelyn presented her final offer. Aegis Dynamics would purchase the seaside house and the old manufacturing workshop for enough money to settle the remaining debts and prevent the family from falling into complete bankruptcy. In return, Marissa and Harper would leave the house within 30 days. No delays. No negotiations. No requests for additional money. Harper shot to her feet. She said it was the family home. Evelyn looked directly at her sister. "That house used to be my home, until all of you decided I was not worthy of sitting at the dinner table." Harper had nothing left to say. 30 days later, the final moving truck drove away from the coastal road. Marissa took the expensive furniture. Harper carried boxes filled with documents and designer clothing. Neither of them looked back at the house. Evelyn stood on the porch, holding her father's old key. When she entered the workshop behind the house, she found everything covered in dust. The wooden workbench still stood beneath the window. The old blueprints remained rolled up inside the cabinet. A small dent was still visible on the wall from the hammer she had dropped when she was 12 years old. Evelyn placed the restored mechanical watch on the table. The second hand began to move. The sound was very faint, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a heart coming back to life. Several months later, Evelyn reopened the workshop under a new name, the Daniel Carter Engineering Foundation, named after the father who had taught her how to hold a wrench before she could write a complete sentence. The foundation provided tuition support, equipment, and internship programs for young women who wanted to pursue mechanics, robotics, and automation. Evelyn did not keep the house to prove that she had won. She kept it so she could transform a place once filled with rejection into a place where doors would open for others. On her first Christmas Eve back, she sat beside the fireplace, listened to the waves striking the rocky shore, and watched the snow fall beyond the balcony. The door remained open. No one was locked outside anymore. And for the first time in 6 years, Evelyn understood that letting go did not mean forgetting what they had done. It meant the memory no longer had the power to decide who she would become. If you were in Evelyn's place, would you have walked away forever, or would you have forgiven the family that abandoned you when they finally came back asking for help? Sometimes forgiveness brings peace, but forgiveness does not always mean reopening the door to those who chose to hurt us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Evelyn made the right decision, or did she go too far? If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of betrayal, courage, justice, and new beginnings.